Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Raven's Readings. I've been reading from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, published in 1876 by Mark Twain. It's set in 1840 along the Mississippi River, near the town of Hannibal, where Twain grew up. I do readings twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, and today is the last chapter of this story. I'm considering two possibilities for the next story. One choice would be to do Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery, or I could do Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town by the Canadian humorist Stephen Leacock. I'll read a bit from each at the end of this. Let me know what you prefer. If you subscribe to my Substack newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. In the last chapters, Tom and Huck announced their newfound riches. All that gold will change their lives, but how much? Chapter 35. The reader may rest satisfied that Tom's and Huck's windfall made a mighty stir in the poor little village of St. Petersburg. So vast a sum, all in actual cash, seemed next to incredible. It was talked about, gloated over, glorified, until the reason of many of the citizens tottered under the strain of the unhealthy excitement. Every haunted house in St. Petersburg and the neighboring villages was dissected, plank by plank, and its foundations dug up and ransacked for hidden treasure. Not by boys, but men, pretty grave, unromantic men, too, some of them. Wherever Tom and Huck appeared, they were courted, admired, stared at. The boys were not able to remember that their remarks had possessed such weight before, but now their sayings were treasured and repeated. Everything they did seemed somehow to be regarded as remarkable. They had evidently lost the power of doing and saying commonplace things. Moreover, their past history was raked up and discovered to bear marks of conspicuous originality. The village paper published biographical sketches of the boys. The widow Douglas put Huck's money out at 6%, and Judge Thatcher did the same with Tom's at Aunt Polly's request. Each lad had an income now that was simply prodigious. $1 for every weekday in the year and half the Sundays. It was just what the minister got. No, it was what he was promised. He generally couldn't collect it. $1.25 a week would board, lodge, and school a boy in those simple old days, and clothe them and wash them too, for that matter. Judge Thatcher had conceived a great opinion of Tom. He said that no commonplace boy would ever have got his daughter out of the cave. When Becky told her father in strict confidence how Tom had taken her whipping at school, the judge was visibly moved, and when she pleaded grace for the mighty lie which Tom had told in order to shift that whipping from her shoulders to his own, the judge said with a fine outburst that it was a noble, a generous, a magnanimous lie, a lie that was worthy to hold up its head and march down through history, breast to breast with George Washington's lauded truth about the hatchet. Becky thought her father never looked so tall and superb as when he walked the floor and stamped his foot and said that. She went straight off and told Tom about it. Judge Thatcher hoped to see Tom a great lawyer or a great soldier someday. He said he meant to look to it that Tom should be admitted to the National Military Academy and afterward trained in the best law school in the country in order that he might be ready for either career or both. Huck Finn's wealth and the fact that he was now under the widow Douglas's protection introduced him into society, dragged him into it, hurled him into it, and his sufferings were almost more than he could bear. The widow's servants kept him clean and neat, combed and brushed, and they bedded him nightly in unsympathetic sheets that had not one little spot or stain which he could press to his heart and know for a friend. He had to eat with a knife and fork. He had to use napkin, cup, and plate. He had to learn his book. He had to go to church. He had to talk so properly that speech was becoming insipid in his mouth. Whithersoever he turned, the bars and shackles of civilization shut him in and bound him hand and foot. He bravely bore these miseries for 3 weeks, and then one day he turned up missing. For 48 hours the widow hunted for him everywhere in great distress. The public were profoundly concerned. They searched high and low. They dragged the river for his body. Early the third morning, and Tom Sawyer wisely went poking among some old empty hogsheads down behind the abandoned slaughterhouse, and in one of them he found the refugee. Huck had slept there. He had just breakfasted upon some stolen odds and ends of food, and was lying off now in comfort with his pipe. He was unkempt, uncombed, and clad in the same old ruin of rags that had made him picturesque in the days when he was free and happy. Tom routed him out, told him the trouble he had been causing, and urged him to go home. Huck's face lost its tranquil content and took a melancholy cast. He said, "Oh, don't talk about it, Tom. I've tried it, and it don't work. It don't work, Tom. It ain't for me. I ain't used to it. The widder's good to me and friendly, but I can't stand them ways. She makes me get up just at the same time every morning. She makes me wash. They comb me all to thunder. She won't let me sleep in the woodshed. I gotta wear them blamed clothes that just smothers me, Tom. They don't seem to let any air through them somehow, and they're so rotten nice that I can't set down or lay down or roll around anywhere. I ain't slid on a cellar door for, well, it appears to be years. I gotta go to church and sweat and sweat. I hate them ornery sermons. I can't catch a fly in there. I can't chaw. I gotta wear shoes all Sunday. The widder eats by a bell. She goes to bed by a bell. She gets up by a bell. Everything's so awful regular. A body can't stand it." "Well, everybody does that way, Huck." "Tom, it don't make no difference. I ain't everybody, and I can't stand it. It's awful to be tied up so. And grub comes too easy. I don't take no interest in victuals that way. I gotta ask to go a-fishing. I gotta ask to go in a-swimming, and durned if I ain't gotta ask to do everything. Well, I've got to talk so nice that there's no comfort. I got to go up in the attic and rip out a while every day to get a taste in my mouth, or I'd have died, Tom. The widder wouldn't let me smoke. She wouldn't let me yell. She wouldn't let me gape or stretch or scratch before folks." And then with a spasm of special irritation and injury, "And Dad fetch it, she prayed all the time. I never seen such a woman. I had to shove, Tom. I just had to. Beside that, the school's going to open, and I had to go to it. I wouldn't stand that, Tom." "Looky here, Tom. Being rich ain't what it's cracked up to be. It's just worry and sweat and wishing he was dead all the time. Now these clothes suit me, and this barrel suits me, and I ain't ever going to shake 'em anymore, Tom. Tom, I wouldn't never got into all this trouble if it hadn't have been for that money. Now you just take my share of it along with yourn and give me a 10-center sometimes, not many times, because I don't give a dern for a thing unless it's tolerable hard to get, and you go and beg off for me with the widder." "Oh, Huck, you know I can't do that. 'Tain't fair. Besides, if you'll try this thing just a while longer, you'll come to like it." "Like it? Yeah, the way I'd like a hot stove if I was to sit on it long enough. No, Tom, I won't be rich, and I won't live in them cussedly, smotherly houses. I like the woods and the river and the hogsheads, and I'll stick to 'em, too. Blame it all, just as we've got guns in a cave and all just fixed to rob, then there this darn foolishness has got to come up and spile it all." Tom saw his opportunity. "Looky here, Huck, being rich ain't going to keep me back from turning robber." "No? Oh, good looks, are you in real dead-one earnest, Tom?" "Well, just as dead earnest as I'm sitting here. But, Huck, we can't let you into the gang if you ain't respectable, you know." Huck's joy was quenched. "Can't let me in, Tom? Didn't you let me go for a pirate?" "Oh, yes, but that's different. A robber's more high-toned than what a pirate is a general thing. In most countries, they're awfully high up in the nobility, dukes and such." "Now, Tom, ain't you always been friendly with me? You wouldn't ship me out, would you, Tom? You wouldn't do that now, would you, Tom?" "Huck, I wouldn't want to, and I don't want to, but what would people say? Why, they'd say, Tom Sawyer's gang, pretty low characters in it. They'd mean you, Huck. You wouldn't like that, and I wouldn't." Huck was silent for some time, engaged in a mental struggle, and then he said, "Well, I'll go back to the widder for a month and tackle it and see if I can come to stand it if you'll let me belong to the gang, Tom." "All right, Huck, it's a whiz. Come along, old chap, and I'll ask the widow to let up on you a little, Huck." "Oh, will you, Tom? Will you now? Oh, that's good. If she'll let up on some of the roughest things, I'll smoke private and cuss private and crowd through her bust. When are you going to start the gang and turn robbers?" "Oh, right off. We'll get the boys together and have the initiation tonight, maybe." "Have the which?" "Have the initiation." "What's that?" It's to swear to stand by one another and never tell the gang's secrets, and even if you're chopped all to flinders and kill anybody in all his family that hurts one of the gang. Well, that's gay. That's mighty gay, Tom, I tell you. I bet it is. And all that swearing's got to be done at midnight in the lonesomest, awfulest place you can find. A haunted house is the best, but they're all ripped up now. Well, midnight's good anyway, Tom. Oh, yes, so it is. And you've got to swear on a coffin and sign it in blood. Oh, now that's something like. Why, it's 1,000,000 times bullier than pirating. I'll stick to the widder till I rot, Tom, and if I get to be a regular ripper of a robber and everybody's talking about it, I reckon she'll be proud she snaked me out of the wet. Conclusion. So endeth this chronicle. It being strictly a history of a boy, it must stop there. The story could not go much further without becoming the history of a man. When one writes a novel about grown people, he knows exactly where to stop, that is, with a marriage, but when he writes of juveniles, he must stop where he best can. Some of the characters that perform in this book still live and are prosperous and happy. Someday it may seem worthwhile to take up the story of the younger ones again and see what sort of men and women they turned out to be. Therefore, it will be wisest not to reveal any of that part of their lives at present. End of chapter, and the novel. So all ends well. Did you like this adventure? Do you miss the days of childhood? Mark Twain wrote more novels on the boy's adventures. I may read some of them later. In the meantime, here are a couple of teasers from other authors. The first is from Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town by Stephen Leacock. I'll read part of the first chapter. Chapter 1, The Hostelry of Mr. Smith. I don't know whether you know Mariposa. If not, it's of no consequence, for if you know Canada at all, you're probably well acquainted with a dozen towns just like it. There it lies in the sunlight, sloping up from the little lake that spreads out at the foot of the hillside on which the town is built. There's a wharf beside the lake, and lying alongside of it a steamer that's tied to the wharf with 2 ropes about the same size as they use on the Lusitania. The steamer goes nowhere in particular, for the lake is landlocked, and there's no navigation for the Mariposa Belle, except to run trips in the 1st of July and the Queen's birthday, and dictate excursions of the Knights of Pythias and the Sons of Temperance to and from the local option townships. In point of geography, the lake is called Lake Wissanotti, and the river running out of it, the Ossawippi, just as the main street of Mariposa is called Missinaba Street and the county Missinaba County. But these names do not really matter. Nobody uses them. People simply speak of the lake and the river and the main street, much in the same way they always call the Continental Hotel Pete Robinson's and the Pharmaceutical Hall Elliot's Drugstore. But I suppose this is just the same in everyone else's town as in mine, so I need lay no stress upon it. The town, I say, has one broad street that runs up from the lake, commonly called the Main Street. There's no doubt about its width. When Mariposa was laid out, there was none of that short-sightedness which is seen in the cramped dimensions of Wall Street and Piccadilly. Missinaba Street is so wide that if you were to roll Jeff Thorpe's barber shop over on its face, it wouldn't reach halfway across. Up and down the main street are telegraph poles of cedar of colossal thickness, standing at a variety of angles and carrying rather more wires than are commonly seen at a transatlantic cable station. On the main street in itself, a number of buildings of extraordinary importance, Smith's Hotel and the Continental and the Mariposa House and the 2 banks, and the Commercial and the Exchange, to say nothing of McCarthy's Block, erected in 1878, and Glover's Hardware Store with the Oddfellows Hall above it. Then on the cross street that intersects Missinaba Street at the main corner, there's the Post Office and the Fire Hall and the Young Men's Christian Association and office of the Mariposa News Packet. In fact, to the eye of discernment, a perfect jostle of public institutions comparable only to Threadneedle Street or Lower Broadway. On all the side streets there are maple trees and broad sidewalks, and trim gardens with upright calla lilies, and houses with verandas which are here and there being replaced by residences with piazzas. To the careless eye, the scene on the main street of a summer afternoon is one of deep and unbroken peace. The empty street sleeps in the sunshine. There's a horse and buggy tied to the hitching post in front of Glover's hardware store. There is, usually and commonly, the burly figure of Mr. Smith, proprietor of Smith's Hotel, standing in his checkered waistcoat on the steps of his hostelry, and perhaps, further up the street, Lawyer McCartney going for his afternoon mail, or the Reverend Mr. Drone, the rural dean of the Church of England Church, going home to get his fishing rod after a mother's auxiliary meeting. But this quiet is mere appearance. In reality, and to those who know it, the place is a perfect hive of activity. Wyatt Netley's butcher shop, established in 1882, there are no less than 4 men working on the sausage machines in the basement. At the Newspacket office, there are as many more job printing. There's a long-distance telephone with 4 distracting girls on high stools wearing steel caps and talking incessantly. And the offices in Mr. McCarthy's block are dentists and lawyers with their coats off, ready to work at any moment. And from the big planing factory down beside the lake where the railroad siding is, you may hear all through the hours of the summer the long, drawn-off music of the running saw. Busy? Well, I should think so. Ask any of its inhabitants if Mariposa isn't a busy, hustling, thriving town. Ask Mullins, the manager of the Exchange Bank, who comes hustling over to his office from the Mariposa house every day at 10:30 and scarcely has time all morning to go out and take a drink with the manager of the Commercial. Or ask, well, for that matter, ask any of them if they ever knew a more rushing, go-ahead town than Mariposa. The second sampler is from the start of Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. Chapter 1. Mrs. Rachel Lynde is Surprised. Mrs. Rachel Lynde lived just where the Avonlea main road dipped down into a little hollow, fringed with adlers and ladies' eardrops, and traversed by a brook that had its source way back in the woods of the old Cuthbert place. It was reputed to be an intricate, headlong brook in its earlier course through these woods, with dark secrets of pool and cascade, but by the time it reached Lynde's Hollow, it was a quiet, well-conducted little stream. For not even a brook could run past Mrs. Rachel Lynde's door without due regard for decency and decorum. It probably was conscious that Mrs. Rachel was sitting at her window, keeping a sharp eye on everything that passed, from brooks and children up. If she noticed anything odd or out of place, she would never rest until she had ferreted out the whys and wherefores thereof. There are plenty of people in Avonlea and out of it who can attend closely to their neighbor's business by dint of neglecting their own, but Mrs. Rachel Lynde was one of those capable creatures who can manage their own concerns and those of other folks into the bargain. She was a notable housewife. Her work was always done and well done. She ran the sewing circle, helped run the Sunday school, and was the strongest prop of the Church Aid Society and Foreign Missions Auxiliary. Yet, with all of this, Mrs. Rachel found abundant time to sit for hours at her kitchen window, knitting cotton warp quilts. She had knitted 16 of them, as Avonlea housekeepers were wont to tell in odd voices, and keeping a sharp eye on the main road that crossed the hollow and wound up the steep red hill beyond. Since Avonlea occupied a small triangular peninsula jutting out into the Gulf of St. Lawrence with water on 2 sides of it, anybody who went out of it or into it had to pass over that hill road and so run the unseen gauntlet of Mrs. Rachel's all-seeing eye. She was sitting there one afternoon in early June. The sun was coming in at the window warm and bright. The orchard on the slope below the house was a bridal flush of pinky-white bloom, hummed over by a myriad of bees. Thomas Lynde, a meek little man whom Avonlea people called Rachel Lynde's husband, was sowing his late turnip seed on the hill field behind the barn, and Matthew Cuthbert ought to have been sowing his on the big red brook field away over by Green Gables. Mrs. Rachel knew that he ought because she had heard him tell Pete Morrison the evening before in William J. Blair's store over at Carmody that he meant to sow his turnip seed the next afternoon. Peter had asked him, of course, for Matthew Cuthbert had never been known to volunteer information about anything in his whole life. And yet, here was Matthew Cuthbert at 3:30 on the afternoon of a busy day, placidly driving over the hollow and up the hill, Moreover, he wore a white collar and his best suit of clothes, which is plain proof that he was going out of Avonlea, and he had the buggy and the sorrel mare, which betokened that he was going a considerable distance. Now, where was Matthew Cuthbert going, and why was he going there? Had it been any other man in Avonlea, Mrs. Rachel, deftly putting this and that together, might have given a pretty good guess as to both questions, but Matthew so rarely went from home. It must be something pressing and unusual which was taking him. He was the shyest man alive and hated to have to go among strangers to any place where he might have to talk. Matthew, dressed up with a white collar and driving in a buggy, was something that didn't happen often. Mrs. Rachel, ponder she might, could make nothing of it, and our afternoon's enjoyment was spoiled. I'll just step over to Green Gables after tea and find out from Marilla where he's gone and why, the worthy woman finally concluded. He doesn't generally go to town this time of year, and he never visits. If he'd run out a turnip seed, he wouldn't dress up and take the buggy to go for more. He wasn't driving fast enough to be going for a doctor. Yet something must have happened since last night to start him off. I'm clean puzzled, that's what. I won't know a minute's peace of mind or conscience till I know what has taken Matthew Cuthbert out of Avonlea today. I'll stop there. So Anne will be about 9 hours long, which will take 9 weeks total. Sunshine Sketches will be about 6 weeks. Any preferences? Leave me a comment. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoy this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Check out my other posts on my Substack at ravensview.substack.com. And remember to share this with your friends. Ta-ta for now.